Week 14 of the NFL season is in the books. Will we actually get a week 15? Let's have a chat about it. The Full 10 Yards NFL podcast.
Hello, everyone. Cecil Martin here.
Hey, this is Hunter Henry.
What's up, man? This is Max Crosby, part of Raider Nation.
Hey, this is Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman.
Hey, it's Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks.
Hey, this is Jerry Judy, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, and you're listening to the 14-Yard NFL podcast.
What a time to be alive, hey fellas. What a time to be alive indeed. Let's welcome her in. Josh, how you doing, mate?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. I've just been called up to be the Cleveland Browns starting tight end on Saturday, so I've just been hard on the practice field. I think I was the 105th pick, but everybody else seemed to get COVID, so it is what it is.
Sounds about right, mate. Hey, you shouldn't joke about it, mate. You may well be suiting up the way things are going this week. Steve, how you doing, fella? You had any call-ups for the Eagles?
No, not. I mean, the Washington football team, their opponents this week have got absolutely no defensive line left because they're all on the COVID list. So, but yeah, it's amazing what it's doing this week. I'm sure we're going to get into it, but yeah, we said for a while that this might be coming, and we've gone 14 weeks without it really affecting anyone, and all of a sudden here it is in one big giant hurricane. It's all come at once. So
all nicely Christmas wrapped. It's all nicely gift wrapped for us.
Yeah, it couldn't really have come at a worse time. We'll get into it, fellas. Let's have a quick look back at Week 14. You can tell the NFL settling down. I only got 2 wrong on Pick'ems this week, boys. That feels like a minor miracle in itself. I will take that. Even if I haven't caught up any ground on you, Josh, I will take that as a personal little win. Big wins in some of the... Oh, well, indeed.
You should. 12 out of 14 is a good week. In fact, I think it's the best week of the season so far.
It certainly is for me, mate, but that doesn't take much doing. Big wins in some of the key games. The Vikings over the Steelers on Thursday Night Football. Big comeback from the Steelers just fell short. The Chiefs probably cementing certainly their favouritism in the division. Still a couple of clutch games to come, but absolutely hammered the Raiders. Browns kept their season alive, beating the Ravens. The Cowboys probably seal the NFC East. As Washington didn't decide to turn up until the second half, unfortunately. 27-20 win for the Cowboys. The Bucs went all the way to overtime, but got the better of the Bills, who continue their downward spiral. Overtime as well for the 49ers over the Bengals. And the Monday Night Football was probably the other game that had some serious sort of divisional and playoff implications. And the Rams finally getting one over the Cardinals, 30-23. And that all of a sudden makes that division slightly interesting again. So plenty of good games last week. But like I say, we may as well get straight into it, boys. It's the talking point of the week, isn't it? It's obviously huge again in this country. It's all over the news. Obviously, this new variant of COVID seemingly, obviously, much more transmissible, even if potentially milder. Let's keep our fingers crossed on that second point, but obviously, we'll wait and see. But certainly, from a transmission perspective, we're recording this on the day that the UK has recorded its highest number of daily confirmed cases. And I think we are safe to say the day the NFL has had its highest number of confirmed cases and players put onto the COVID list. 7 teams now in the league's enhanced COVID measures. Almost feels inevitable that the whole league is going to at least go to those measures, even if it isn't a problem today. It feels like it's a problem waiting tomorrow. Steve, I'm going to come to you first and foremost. We've said we didn't want it to have a massive impact on the season. It feels like it's going to, though, doesn't it, mate? I mean, what's your take on what Week 15 probably does or doesn't look like?
It's mad, isn't it, how it's all come at once? Like we said at the top of the show, COVID's gone relatively under the radar this season, and we've got pretty much an unaffected season completely. There's been the odd player here and there who's had to miss a game because of getting the virus itself, but it's gone relatively under the radar. But then all of a sudden this week, it's all happened. So apparently, on Monday and Tuesday, 75 players returned positive tests, and they obviously that's continued on today, and obviously you guys will know with all the Cleveland players and coaches that have tested positive today, and that's still coming in, and obviously they're still waiting results of some tests. But apparently, if they keep going this week at the rate they have been over the last 2.5 days, they will have more positive player tests this week than they've had for the entire first 3 months of the regular season, which was 110, which is wild. Like, how is it all of a sudden just happened all at once? It's crazy. And if it's mental that the NFL Players Association has been pushing for daily testing of players since the start of the season. Now, obviously, the NFL decided that they removed that at the beginning of the season for anyone who is fully vaccinated. If you're unvaccinated, you still have to be tested daily. But in the NFL, if you're vaccinated, you still don't have to be tested daily. It's just once a week, I think, is the regulation. And so the fact that they're not testing daily just shows that this is just going to spread through rampantly, unaware. Players could be asymptomatic and completely unaware that they've got it and give it to everyone else. And it's crazy that we haven't had more up until this point, and now we've got, what do you say, 7 teams are in the sort of enhanced protocols. Your guys, Browns, are in disarray. Like, the Washington football team have got no defensive line left. Like, it's just ripping through the league. But I don't know what the answer is, because you can't cancel a week. Like, where do you put it? We can't push the season back, can we? Is that possible? Would they do that? Would they? We talked about this, didn't we? Cast your mind back 2 months, 3 months ago. We talked about what would be the fines for it. What would be the what do you do to teams? Do you say, like, well, look, what's the cause of this? If it's an unvaccinated player, well, you've got to forfeit the game because you had the chance to do it and you didn't take it. But then how do you determine what the cause is? It's so difficult. This is going to be a real headache. And I think we are recording on Wednesday evening, and I think come Friday, Saturday, this news is only going to get worse before it gets better.
Most definitely. I mean, just before Josh, I'll bring you in to give your take on things, and then we can potentially debate solutions. Just run through the whole league as it stands at time of recording. The Falcons have got 3 players on the list. The Ravens 1, the Bills 2, the Panthers 1, although that one is Christian McCaffrey, so obviously not ideal if you were going to pick one player for the Panthers.
That's 4.
5 for the Chicago Bears, 1 for the Bengals, 11 for the Cleveland Browns, including head coach Kevin Stefanski, to put it up to 12. Also includes, obviously, Baker Mayfield. Dallas Cowboys 1, Houston Texans 2, the Colts 1, the Kansas City Chiefs 1, and that's a big player for them as well, defensive tackle Chris Jones. The Chargers 2, but a big player for them, Rashawn Slater, the impressive rookie left tackle. 11 for the LA Rams, including Jalen Ramsey, including Odell Beckham Jr. 4 for the Dolphins, 7 for the Vikings, including Danielle Hunter and Alexander Mattison. And obviously, with Dalvin Cook's injury problems, Mattison could also be a huge player for them. 1 for the Patriots, 2 for the Giants, 2 for the Jets, 2 for the Eagles, 2 for the Titans, and the Washington football team with 17 players on the COVID list, including, as Steve has alluded to, Jonathan Allen, including Montez Sweat. It is just an absolute mess, isn't it, Josh? I mean, it has just really snowballed this week. And like you say, we're recording this on Wednesday. It feels as though it's going to get worse before the weekend's out. Yeah,
you're going to probably see a few more on that list, and by a few more, I mean probably add an extra 20 to 30 players on that. A few will come off the list as they go on as well. Like the Browns were up to 14 at one point today, but a few have come off that list, for example. But what it does mean is that you have a situation whereby it's not only a case of competitive disadvantage, but also just a complete diminishing of your product at this point. The NFL has got to think about its product. And this isn't the same as a wide receiver group, for example, not being able to play, or your quarterback not being able to play. We're talking about whole teams going in with half a squad at this point. It's pretty much what it's going to come down to. The Browns are going to host the Raiders at this rate with a good third of their starting roster sitting out asymptomatically. It's it's got to be the most frustrating thing in the world as well, and it's hurting everyone. Sponsors can't be happy about it. Fans can't be happy about it. Players probably aren't happy about it. A lot of these will get, in-game bonuses and stuff like that, which they're not earning towards as well. I know there was a huge, there was a huge argument from the NFLPA for more testing, but this was in a world where vaccinations meant not catching it and not transmitting it. We're now living with a completely different variant where realistically you can have all the vaccine you want. It's going to get past the vaccine, but the vaccine's going to mean that you're not hospitalized, but it's not going to be as much of a threat to you, apparently, according to the real world data at time of recording. Please no one sue me from a medical basis. But if we live in that world, do we now come up with new protocols that mean that if you are vaccinated and not a threat to your own safety and to the vaccinated around you, is that good enough to go, especially considering the NFL's stance on vaccinations being first protocol for players? Now, these are the questions that got to be asked in order to save your product. To Steve's point on, what can we do in terms of, pushing back the season, etc. You've got 1 week that you can push it back to without affecting the Super Bowl, which is Pro Bowl week. Shove the Pro Bowl to after the Super Bowl, maybe. That's pretty much as you can do on that, and maybe give yourself a Christmas fire break to get people in the building and then start having bubbles again. But will they be able to mobilize that quickly? Most of these stuff are done with agonizing negotiations over several weeks in the summer. So, this is not easy.
I think is the protocol at the moment is as long as you're vaccinated, once you test positive, I think you then have to return 2 negative tests within a 24-hour period. If you do that, then you can come off the COVID list and you're eligible to play. And that is if you play Sunday, I think that can happen right up until Saturday. So like that, they give you all the time to be able to prove
48.
that you can play.
It's
Is it 48 hours?
Yeah, so that means if you
Right.
test positive on a Wednesday, then you've got, I think it's Friday, Saturday, then Sunday. So you have to test negative on a Friday.
Yeah. So as we've said, there's still a chance for a lot of these guys that are testing positive today that could still play Sunday. But I think just before you go back, Sean, my concern is that when we start talking about sort of postponing games and maybe pushing things back a week, problem is that this could happen again next week and the week after and the week after. And then, it's affecting the Browns and the football team predominantly this week. Next week, it could be the Eagles and the Cardinals. The week after, it could be the Chiefs and the Bears. It could be any of these 32 teams. And it's lucky that we've got as far as we have without this happening already. It's crazy that we've got 14 weeks in the bag when there hasn't been any real major concerns. Now, I've just seen a tweet from an Eagles reporter who's spoken to the NFL about the Eagles-Washington game specifically, but the NFL have said there's been no discussion of changing the status of any game. That's at the time of recordings. That's 8:30 GMT.
Was that tweet sent out recently? Because I know that was the stance this morning, about 10 o'clock Eastern.
Yeah, so I mean, look at this. I've just seen this as well. This is what this past week has cost Washington: 7 defensive linemen, 3 centers, 4 linebackers, 3 of its top 5 wide receivers, 3 tight ends, 2 cornerbacks, 1 quarterback, 1 safety, 1 offensive tackle. That's how much their team has been absolutely decimated by this. So, but then, where do you draw the line? It's such a headache.
Yeah, it is such a headache, and I mean, just to bring everybody up to speed, in terms of what the actual rules are. We talked a lot about this in the off season, didn't we? Because obviously it was a big topic of conversation around the original rollout of the vaccine, and obviously the sort of push for the league to get more and more of the players vaccinated. The only thing that he's suggested is if a unvaccinated person is testing positive, that is the only time that it talks about games being forfeited. That is the only time that is mentioned, because I know a number of people have said, well, teams will have to forfeit games if they can't put people in. Ultimately, there is nothing at all mentioned in terms of any game being cancelled or forfeited if it's through vaccinated players. Now, the difficulty comes from, like you say, the Browns have had 11 on the list today, I believe at least one of those from all of the press reports hasn't been vaccinated. Now, does that mean that everybody gets tarred with the same brush and it's John Johnson's fault that he hasn't been vaccinated? I honestly have no idea what they would do, but essentially what they have said is that if a game cannot be rescheduled within the quarantine 18-week schedule and is cancelled due to a COVID outbreak among non-vaccinated players on one of the competing teams, the club with the outbreak will forfeit the contest and will be deemed to have played 16 games for purpose of draft, waiver priority, etc. For the purpose of playoff seeding, the forfeited team will be credited with a loss and the other team will be credited with a win. That is the only thing that is written in stone in terms of what the league set out at the start of the season. And it is going to be a real headache. Steve, you've hit the nail on the head. It feels like, you say, probably a problem at the moment, particularly for the Browns and the football team. You know, I mentioned all of those teams that had players on the list. You're not talking about the third and fourth string tackle on the Cleveland Browns. You're talking about the starting cornerback. You're talking about the starting quarterback. You're talking about the starting offensive tackles. Same with the football team. But you're absolutely right. It could be another team next week. So if rescheduling's not the answer, is it just a case of these teams are going to have to suck it up and it is a case of next man up? And ultimately, look, to Josh's point, the product may well be hurting over the course of the next month, but is it more important for the league to get the product delivered on time, even if it's not necessarily the product that they want to put out on the field?
Something to throw in as well onto this is it's going to have to be incredibly quick fire to do it, but I think it's the only way to save this week if it is the case, because I look at Chiefs Chargers, on Thursday, and they're not going to cancel that now. I mean, they see no reason to, really. Is it a case of redefining the rules on what happens if you are if you are testing positive? I've seen that quite a lot with the Twitter journos today, that is what the NFL are looking at, as to what happens if you test positive and are vaccinated. There's a number of things which seem to be at play. I think that the idea of postponing games is the last thing the league wants to do. And the only reason as to why I bring up a potential fire break would be much to your point, Steve, of the fact that it could happen to anyone at any time. I mean, my God, me and Sean are fans of the Browns, where we've had 3 outbreaks, I think, since all this has started, the most in it with any team in the league. But the idea being that it would then bring back the bubbles that they had at the start of last year. So it would be bringing in heightened things to stop it from happening, and also potentially to get maybe Christmas out the way so that they can return to some sort of safety thereafter. But that would have huge implications. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be far more likely that the NFL is going to that the NFL is going to change some form of ruling on what it means to, be a danger to other players.
I think one of the other difficulties is that we have just finished all the buys. So every team has now had their bye. So there's no buys to play with. Remember when this happened last season? Things were changing and bye weeks were changed, and games were slotted in because there was still plenty of time left in the league. There's 4 weeks left of the regular season. There's just no time to play with. And my concern with any sort of postponement, and I absolutely agree, Josh, I think any sort of postponement or any talk of anything like that is the last resort. Like, they don't want to do that, and I still think that I would probably be prepared to put myself on the line and say that at this point now, Wednesday evening, I still think Sunday goes ahead as normal. I just don't think the NFL.
Yeah, I reckon it will.
I just don't think the NFL will postpone anything, purely because it sets a precedent. Let's just take the Cleveland game, for example. Let's say they say, okay, well, Cleveland game's postponed. There's too much there. Because at what point does it become not just about losing your best players, but also just a genuine health risk? Like, there are so many people in that building that might have this and not know yet and not quite be testing positive yet, that actually they could be spreading it to fans, to coaches, to players, everyone else on the field. Like, it becomes a bit of a health concern. But let's say they do that. What happens then next week or the week after when there's an outbreak in New York, for example? Let's say the Giants get a big outbreak and they've got a big game coming up, but the NFL says, oh, actually, you've only got 8 players with it. Cleveland had 13. They got a postponement. You don't. And it's like, well, hang on, where do we draw the line? So I don't think postponements is something they're going to do. I could absolutely see them bringing back some kind of bubbles just to get the season finished, just to start saying like, look, we need to be in bubbles again. We need to minimize contact with the outside world, all that sort of stuff, just to get the season done. Because if not, this is going to be rife, and it's going to. I think, like I said earlier, that the worst is yet to come before the situation gets better in terms of people, more players and more coaches getting infected. I think the season, the difficulty with what you were saying, Sean, as well, with it being unvaccinated players, is how do you determine that if it was that player that started the spread?
Yeah.
And so therefore, that's why they've put that wording in there about forfeiting games, because they know that's incredibly difficult to prove. And you could imagine if a team got a game, like let's say, for example, the football team, let's say they determine, the football team of because I've seen it on social media so far today, people suggesting that this outbreak is because of an unvaccinated player at Washington. I don't know if that's true or not. Let's just say it is. How do you prove that? And if it was to get forfeited and they lose that game and the Eagles win it, what's to say that Washington doesn't challenge that, like, legally somehow?
Yeah.
You just know they're not going to go down without a fight with that. So it's in a very difficult, precarious position. I think this week happens as normal, and then I think Josh, you're right that there could be some more stricter sort of rules around bubbles and all that sort of stuff could come into play. But yeah, we are definitely not out of the woods at this point.
Tell you what, try this on for sight. Sorry, Sean. I've just read something of which one of the journalists that's been keeping an eye on this today has put out. This could be shortened to 1 negative test result instead of the current 2. Now, if that happens, that really does open the door to those that get it to come back if they're asymptomatic. Even something as small as that gives the option. If you're tested on a Monday, you could well be back in by Sunday at that rate. I think that would really help. I don't know what you guys think.
I think the difficult thing is, and we talked about this before we hit the record button, didn't we? The league are really damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. They obviously want to protect the product, and things like you've suggested there, or that journalist has suggested there, probably help to try and protect the product. Does it help in terms of the long-term health of its players? Probably not, if we're going by the letter of the law. I think the issue is these rules that were drew up in the summer was very much with what we knew at the time, and obviously the expectation was that the vaccination would not only help in terms of obviously reducing the severity, it would also help with the reduction of the transmission. You could see from a number of these players now that are double vaccinated. In the case of Kevin Stefanski, he's triple vaccinated in terms of having a booster, and he's still caught it. It may well be that Kevin Stefanski's passed it on to everybody in the Browns building. Nobody knows, how it's getting around from person to person. I think that's where the league have got a real issue here now. Because, like I say, the rules don't really allow for any of this. I think they could do things in terms of, like you say, allow asymptomatic players to participate, but ultimately, the whole point of can only base it on what we know from the UK. The whole point of taking a test that if you're deemed to have the virus is you then isolate so you don't become a risk to anybody else. I don't see how you can put somebody on an NFL field and get them, in each other's faces and all of that kind of thing. That just doesn't seem to be, for me at least, a viable option. I think the testing in terms of, 1 as opposed to 2 negative tests, nobody that has been on a COVID list has come back in the week. Nobody throughout the entire season has come back. If you have ended up on the COVID list, nobody has come back. And again, can only base it off what we know from this country. If you get COVID, I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, you probably know this, you obviously were unfortunately, picked it up a few weeks back. I don't think the government in this country will give you another PCR test within 28 days because they say effectively you could still test positive. So
yeah, speaking from my experience, because like you said, about 6 weeks ago, I actually had it myself, and I am double jabbed, so it's a breakthrough infection. They do happen. Luckily, my symptoms were very, very mild, so I didn't really have too much of an issue with it. But in terms of the actual logistics of having it itself, I tested positive, and I didn't test negative on a lateral flow until I think 9 days later. After my positive test. So that's why people don't return from the COVID list, because it isn't just as simple as getting a positive test. Oh, I'm double vaccinated. 3 days later, I'm negative. Fine. I mean, that can happen, I believe. But my understanding is it takes a little while for you to start testing negative again, because it's all
Yeah.
about the how you can transmit the virus. And I never thought when I signed up for an NFL podcast last year that we'd be having an interesting discussion about virology. But yeah, no, my understanding is that yeah, you're absolutely spot on, and then you don't start testing negative until much later on. And I've been told now I shouldn't have another PCR test for 90 days. That's a PCR, because PCRs are much more sort of detailed and they can pick up sort of smaller particles of the virus, whereas a lateral flow can't. So, but I've been told that there's not, from all of the messaging that I've got from the UK government, from the NHS, all that sort of stuff, there's no point in me taking another PCR within 90 days of a positive PCR test, because it can give false results. So once you've had it for 90 days, there's no point in taking another test, because you could get another positive, but that positive might be false, because it's still your body shedding the dead particles of the previous virus. So it's such a difficult scenario. You are spot on that players just don't come back from the COVID list. It isn't just to snap your fingers and it's done. Like Dallas Goedert went on for the Eagles earlier in the season and he missed a game. It just happens. And the difficulty is that where do you stop? Where do you say, like, okay, well, if, like, because there was a situation last year, wasn't there, where the Browns lost an entire positional group, wasn't it? Was it the wide receiver core? Or someone, an entire positional group was out, and so when you've got no players in that position to play, how can you play a game of football? But then the other team could say, well, it's not our fault. Like, you know, we've managed to keep it up. It's so difficult, because there is no definitive way. Like you say, transmission's one thing, and severity is a whole other thing, and that's why we're all vaccinated. But it doesn't stop us passing it around, unfortunately, and that is just something that we've got to live with. But the NFL has taken these precautions, and I don't know how they can really change it. Unfortunately, it's just unfortunate that the games happen 7 days apart, and infection and then testing negative happens longer than that.
It does indeed. We could talk about it all night, fellas, and like you say, all joking aside, we're obviously not virology experts. You know, we have an opinion on it. I think all of us on here have been vaccinated. Ironically, my booster jab was today, so I'm now sort of triple jabbed and all the rest of it. We'll continue doing what we can to try and stay safe. And obviously, you know, we wish anybody that's on the list a speedy recovery. That's the most important thing in terms of the health of everybody concerned here. You know, we love the game. We want the games to happen, but obviously we certainly want the players to be fit, healthy, and as well as they can be. Let's look at a few games then, fellas, because there are some huge games. We start with one, like Josh alluded to, Thursday night, and I said earlier that the Chiefs have probably cemented themselves, and I stopped myself from saying as division winners. They probably do cement themselves as division winners if they can beat the Chargers tomorrow. But obviously the Chargers are probably the team that are going to overhaul them if anybody does. Josh, huge game. Rashawn Slater, huge miss for the Chargers, assuming that he doesn't come back off the COVID list. I think we will just assume anybody on the list isn't coming back. So big loss for the Chargers. Chiefs big win obviously last week.
But big loss for the Chiefs on the other side of the ball. You know, it seems to have cancelled itself out really on the in terms of that. So let's play ball. This is one of the more exciting games, and it just so happens to be on a Thursday night. The Thursday night games sort of get better towards the end of the season, don't they? They get the rough luck of the draw at the start of the season, and they start slowly getting better. And now you're at Chiefs Chargers. This is the division, really. The Chiefs are looking very, very good at the moment, looking like probably the only team that could probably challenge the Patriots for the number one spot. I can't believe I'm saying that. You know, but this is the reality that we're living in. The Chiefs, I wouldn't say they're back on offense. They're definitely looking better on offense. They're definitely looking more like themselves. I think that the game plan against the Raiders was a lot more like them. It's the defense where they've really come alive. They've got a few trouble spots on the defense with injuries, as well as Chris Jones on the COVID list. So there might be a little bit of an issue in terms of getting that back right. But if there's a team that can take on the Chiefs at the moment, it's the Chargers. But I think that the Chiefs are on too much of a roll at the moment, and this is probably a game too big for the Chargers.
Justin Herbert cemented himself last week as one of, if not the best quarterback from that draft. He was immense last
He
week.
was.
He was so good, and the Chargers have had such a funny season, haven't they? Where it's just been up and down, and they never quite know if they want to make a rush for the playoffs or if they don't. But they're such an intriguing team, and I think I've said most of the season that they are still 1, maybe 2 years away, but they're such an interesting team, and they've got so much cap space next year. So that Chargers team is only going to get better. Meanwhile, the Chiefs, you hit the nail on the head, Josh. The craziest thing about the Chiefs is their turnaround. Like, the defense at the start of the season was giving up 30 plus points most games, and yet all of a sudden their defense is one of the best in the league, and it's like,
Yeah.
how has that happened? Like, you don't usually see those transformations in the middle of a season. Usually it takes an off season and a defensive coordinator firing or something like that. But the fact that they've turned this around and they've only allowed single digit points in the last 3 games is insane. That's incredible. And against the Cowboys, the Broncos, and the Raiders, certainly three you'd say pretty good teams. They're all chasing the playoffs. Certainly the Cowboys are looking at one of the best teams in the NFC. So not to be sniffed at. I think this Chiefs team's come alive at the real important time, and they've got an air of last year's Bucks about them.
Yeah, they certainly are peaking when it matters most. Let's move on, fellas. Saturday night football. You can tell we're getting close to Christmas. Saturday night. Josh, tell me I'm stupid. I still think the Browns have got a chance despite all of this COVID trouble. I'm saying that on Wednesday. I mean, don't get me wrong, we could have another 20 players on the list by this time tomorrow. And if I can even name half of them come Saturday night, I might be quite happy. But as it stands today, despite the fact that it'll be Case Keenum handing the ball off to Nick Chubb, he'll still be handing the ball off to Nick Chubb. So I still have a fancy for the Browns in this one. Browns Raiders. Raiders look like their goose is cooked, but obviously massive COVID issues for the Browns as we've been discussing.
Just checking the weather in Cleveland on Saturday night. 40% chance of rain, 80% over the day, 15-mile-an-hour winds. Yeah, so it's going to be wet, it's going to be boggy, it's going to be horrible in Cleveland, Ohio on Saturday night, which lends to a run game. The Cleveland offensive line has been battered by this COVID outbreak, but the guys that are coming in are run blockers, not pass blockers, of which helps. Case Keenum is probably the best hander offer of a football if there ever was one. So I'm more than happy for him to hand it off to Nick Chubb. And if Nick Chubb's not able to get the runs, of which I actually think he will this week, he's had a couple of bad weeks, but that's because the Baltimore Ravens are one of the best run blockers in the league. I think that if he can't do it, Dearness Johnson sure as hell can. So in terms of can the Browns still participate in this game and still make it a game, absolutely. I don't think that the Raiders are still... I don't think that Raiders fans are overjoyed at the moment. I think that they feel like they're now the favourites, and they are the favourites. I'd probably say that they're about a 5-point favourite currently. But when you consider that that's about a fifth of the Browns starting roster out and you're only about a 5-point favourite, that says a lot. So I'm sorry, gents, was I cut out there?
You did for a very brief moment, mate, but we certainly got the bulk of your point, mate, and I think it was a point well made. Steve, let's flip it over to yourself as the neutral in this one. It's almost a funny situation, really, because the week after the Browns play the Packers, which I think most Browns fans are sort of putting down as a loss, so maybe it would have been better to have had that game this week with all of the issues they've got. But like I say, I suppose really from an opponent perspective, that still you feel they have an opportunity against the Raiders. Probably not the worst team to be playing this week.
No, the Raiders they're one of those teams that you can never just quite get a handle on, and I think they are trending towards just, falling away this season, finishing with a negative record and major changes coming in the off-season in Las Vegas. They have today been handed the 2024 Super Bowl, so that's exciting news for Las Vegas. So the Super Bowl is confirmed going to Vegas in a few years' time. I'm sure that's going to be an absolute chaotic weekend. But this Las Vegas team, even full strength, you'd still, because of the strength of, like you said, Josh, of Cleveland's running game, you still wouldn't want to count out Cleveland, and it would be the most Cleveland thing this season if they get yet more players on the COVID list. The game still goes ahead and they lose to Las Vegas because of COVID. After a season-defining victory against Baltimore, I said it last week. We all said it. That was, go big or go home last week. It was a case of this is our season starts now. They came up with the goods. They beat Baltimore, although for a second at the end there it looked like they weren't going to, but they held on for the win. They got the win, and then next week they get a big COVID test, a big COVID outbreak, decimates the camp, and Kareem Hunt, when he comes back off IRR, is just standing there like the John Travolta gif from Pulp Fiction, just like, where is everyone?
Yeah,
no,
it's
you're pretty spot on there.
Yeah, it would be typical of Cleveland, wouldn't it? But we'll see if the game does go ahead. Like I say, as it stands, it is scheduled for 9:30 Saturday night. If you fancy a really late one Saturday night, the early hours of Sunday morning produces another tasty matchup. The league have done quite well with these two this year, haven't they? Patriots and the Colts. Patriots, the number 1 seed in the AFC, on the road against the Colts, a team, Josh, you've been high on for a number of weeks now. This is a real acid test of how good this Patriots team is, isn't it?
If there was a team that could beat the Patriots, it's the Colts. Yeah, I saw this and I immediately put a circle around it and put, don't be put off by the Colts here when making my picks, because the Colts defense can match up to Mac Jones and this New England offense. They can do that, and the Patriots are going to have to put so much into stopping the Colts run, and the Colts are not bad in the air either. The Colts are actually a pretty well-rounded team. They're the kind of team that can make things difficult for the Patriots. This is the one game that the Patriots are probably going to have to work for the most to actually make this happen. It's going to be a real ding dong. It's going to be really close, I think. Probably only going to be a score in it. I don't know which way it's going to go, but it's going to be interesting either way. But the Colts are a really good side. The Patriots are probably a bit too high for their talent level, and the Colts are probably a bit down compared to their talent level. So, this is going to be a hell of a lot closer than a lot of people think.
I think you're spot on in that this is an acid test for the Colts, and I think I will start to get on your hype train for the Colts if they can beat the Patriots, because this would be a big statement win for them. I think if the last 5, obviously Patriots on a winning streak and they've won the last 5 games. I think they've won more than that, and the Colts have won 4 of the last 5. So in terms of like head to head, in terms of their form, both teams are in red hot form right now, and the Colts shut out the Texans, which albeit it is the Texans, it's still difficult to shut out a team. Yeah. So this defense is, like you say, is playing well. And yeah, this is a real test. And if they can put one over on the Patriots, not only would they stop the hottest team in football, also they would improve to 8-6 and put a real challenge on a Titans team that is faltering in that division. We talked at the start of the season about how the Colts are probably a bit far back to sort of mount a challenge against the Titans, but Titans have dropped off and don't look the same team that they were sort of 6 weeks ago. So yeah, the season's definitely not over. And I think even if the Colts do lose this game, I think their season's still alive. There's still plenty of chances for them to finish 10-7 if they were to lose this one. So Colts are still looking good. I think a lot depends on what happens in that division. But at this point, I certainly wouldn't write them off for challenging Tennessee for the title.
Yeah, we mentioned Tennessee. We won't spend too long on it. Their game this week is against the Steelers. The Steelers 6-1. They desperately need a win to probably stay in playoff contention. The Titans, talk this week that Derrick Henry might not come back, and then other people have squashed that as a bit of a rumor. They obviously would absolutely be a different proposition for anyone in the playoffs if he does indeed come back. The Bills will look to right the wrongs of recent weeks against the Panthers. You'd expect them to take care of business there. The Eagles, potentially the beneficiaries of all of the Washington issues that we talked about earlier, Steve. Washington, like I said, didn't really turn up in the first half against Dallas. Philly, obviously, on a bye week last week. Both teams 6-7. Potentially, still room to play for wildcard positions in the NFC with that kind of record. And like I say, Philly will certainly be looking to take advantage of any issues that are unfortunately coming Washington's way this week.
Yeah, certainly. There's playoff implications for this one massively. I think if Philly win, they take hold of the seventh wildcards, the seventh seed in the wildcard for the NFC. So like this has got massive playoff implications, and I think you'd probably go as far to say, although it's their first time meeting this season, it's probably I'd say you could probably say whoever wins this matchup has probably got the better chance of finishing second in the NFC behind Dallas, because I think Dallas has got it all wrapped up now. It's just a case of where this seventh NFC seed will falls, and it's actually for the first time across both conferences, really, we've got a really interesting and exciting wild card sort of fight. There's so much up for grabs, and no one's really out of it. In the NFC, there's 5 teams at 6 and 7. That's insane. Like that's so many teams, and any
And in the
one of them.
AFC, I think it's 6 teams are on 7 and 6 or something stupid. Yeah,
It's crazy. So 1 week, one result going a different way than you thought it might could have so many implications. So yeah, this is a real business end of the season. Jalen Hurts is still limited in practice. They had a walkthrough today where he would have been limited because he's dealing with a high ankle sprain. So apparently still not good to go 100% yet on Sunday. So it could be Minshew Mania Mark 2. Here we go.
I don't think I can do with any more videos of him violently roughing up his dad just because he got a win.
If he plays as well as he did in New York week before last, then he can happily start again.
Yeah, he did do all right in his first start, and like you say, certainly with those Washington issues, if that pass rush isn't there, whoever's playing quarterback should get plenty of time for the Eagles. The game that everyone's obviously looking forward to, the Jags and the Texans. My word.
Oh.
Talk
The
about the
Jags are
toilet bowl.
favoured in that. The Jags
Oh
are
my
somehow favoured by
God.
3 in that.
Oh,
Couldn't
good
believe
God.
that.
Good Lord. Let's move swiftly on, boys. Giants, Cowboys. Expect the Cowboys to probably win that one. And as Steve said, I think everyone probably has now got the Cowboys pegged as division winners following last week's action. The Lions against the Cardinals. Obviously, the Lions will be buoyed by getting a win. But the Cardinals are surely going to take care of business. It's the ultimate bounce back game for them, isn't it? After losing to the Rams, you did fully expect the Cardinals will take care of business. I jokingly said about a month ago, fellas, stranger things have happened than the Dolphins getting into the playoffs. And since I said that, they haven't lost a game. 6 and 7. They've still got some work to do, but you'd fancy them to get to an even 500 here against the Jets. And stranger things indeed have happened. So we'll wait and see, but certainly expect Miami to continue rolling. Big games then in the late window on Sunday. One that probably won't have too many playoff implications is the 49ers and Falcons. Well, I say that the 49ers certainly in playoff contention, so a big game for them. You probably expect them to take care of business at home. But the other games that are in this window, Broncos and Bengals, Josh. Bengals seemingly, when they're in position, seemingly fluff their lines. I know it went to overtime last week, but high expectations, home game, couldn't get it done. Game now on the road. The Broncos have been up and down themselves. Big win for them last week, 38 points to 10 over the Lions. Their defense has been pretty good most weeks. It's just whether the offense can fire and keep up. Big game this one for both of these sides.
I would not have thought they would have been a few weeks back as well, because I did put the Broncos in the bin, and now I'm sort of, just before the bin man comes along, I'm just sort of picking it out the bin and ironing out the creases and putting it back on the shelf because the Broncos are back. They could well, make a push for one of these wildcard spots. And I fancy them against the Bengals this week. I think that this is very much a go big or go home game for both of these sides. This is very much your playoff starts here. The Bengals absolutely need this win. I think that the AFC North now has one spot in the playoffs. I don't think that there's going to be a second spot going in the wild cards. I reckon it's going to be all about all about who wins the division. So the Bengals absolutely need to keep pace. If they don't do that, then they might well fall off. So they need that. The Broncos absolutely need whatever wins they can get because they've still got Chiefs and Chargers in their own division. So they're going to need to keep pace. But they're doing so. They're doing so quite comfortably as well. And I do think that, first of all, terrible news about Demaryius Thomas over the last week. Thoughts to his family. I thought that the Broncos played brilliantly, and also just touching gestures as well at the ground and between the two teams. I reckon that news will buoy them on in the next couple of weeks. If we're talking from a very realist point of view, I reckon that's going to give them a boost over the next couple of performances. I felt like it definitely did on Sunday, and I think that will continue as well. So I do like the Broncos for this. They are the hot hand.
Steve, you got a point on this game?
It links into the sort of AFC playoff spot, doesn't it? Because the playoffs in the AFC is absolutely fascinating. Because, like you said, you'd think that the teams, obviously aside from the 4 divisional winners, I think another team's going to come out of this division. I don't think it's going to be 2. You'd think that the Colts and the Titans are probably both a good shot of making it. So that leaves one more. And at the moment, the one team that's in the risk of losing that 7th spot is the Buffalo Bills. At the start of the season, none of us would have said that the Bills would be in the risk of missing the playoffs. Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting they're going to miss the playoffs. That's a bit, it's crazy to say just yet. But they're the ones at risk at the moment. They're in the 7th seed right now. We've got the Panthers this week, so perhaps that's a bit of an easy game from them. But yeah, the playoff picture is changing all the time, and like you said, Josh, that Broncos victory will put them in such good spirits to take a Bengals team that lost a tough game against a really informed sort of San Francisco team at the moment. So all to play for. I wouldn't count either team out, and even whoever loses goes to 7-7, I still wouldn't count them out. There's so much football to play in this AFC just yet.
Yeah, and the way the scheduling works, obviously, with all the divisional opponents playing each other, all these teams are going to beat each other up. The divisional games really become the really important ones. The ones, in conference take on an extra importance. The ones against sort of the opposite conference, they're almost extensions of bye weeks at this stage to some extent. The games almost don't matter, even though obviously every game does. I hope you know what I'm trying to say with that, because that's a real contradiction of terms. Rams, Seahawks. You probably expect the Rams to take care of business here. Seattle just want the season to end as quickly as possible, and I think there's big changes coming in Seattle, as we've talked about earlier. Ravens, Packers would normally be an absolute huge game. It is a huge game, I suppose, in terms of importance, but obviously with Lamar Jackson unlikely to go, although John Harbaugh hasn't officially ruled him out. I don't know anybody that can play with a high ankle sprain 1 week after receiving it, particularly a quarterback that relies on scrambling as much as what Lamar Jackson does. It doesn't seem like a ideal situation. And to be fair to Tyler Huntley, when he came in the ball game last week, he did reasonably well. So big game though, Josh. Obviously massive implications for us. Ravens defense, not what it probably used to be, but certainly, will always be competitive. They'll be well coached, but the Packers do look like a class apart down there. You can only I can only see a Packers win here.
Yeah, same here. I think that the Ravens have. I have always harped on about the fact that the Ravens have somehow come out of games smelling of roses when they've just been going through the mud for games on end, and I think that's a very polite way of saying it compared to what I've said it in previous weeks. I think that they are finally paying the piper through no fault of their own. They've been so hit by injuries, and they continue to do so. I think about life as a Browns fan this year being littered with injuries. It's nothing compared to the Baltimore Ravens. So you've got that. The Packers can't seem to do any wrong at the moment. Aaron Rodgers has, ever since he's come back onto the scene after the immunized gate, or whatever you want to call it, he has been on fire. He's been on MVP form. It's been, quite something to watch. So realistically, you go with the hot hand, the Packers. I can't see them losing to the Ravens. I can't see them losing to the Browns. I can't see them losing to pretty much anybody at the moment. And also, if you're the Ravens, not that you would ever admit this or play this way, etc., do you think to yourselves internally amongst the training staff, no need to go all out this week because we have players out. We don't want to get any more injuries. Maybe we just look to the rest of the season and look to just get through and win the division to put us into the playoffs. Does a hard-fought game against the Packers really help you at this point?
Yeah, I mean, the Ravens will be kicking themselves. They had chances, particularly against the Steelers, 2 weeks ago, they certainly had opportunities at the back end of the Cleveland game, where they could have really put their stamp on the division. They could have had a 2 or 3 game lead, and then I think they would have allowed themselves to potentially think that way. I think with the way things are at the moment, they'll obviously have the advantage of the Browns game being played potentially on Saturday. And obviously they'll know the results of that. I mean, Cleveland could actually be in first place of the division by the time the Ravens kick off. That will determine the approach that they take. But I certainly, like I say, I think that the Packers will be the team to be siding with in this one anyway. Steve, couple of other games in terms of Sunday night football, Monday night football. A little bit surprised the Sunday night football didn't get flexed with some of the games that we have talked about, but it's obviously a divisional game. The Bucks against the Saints, and then Tuesday we've got the Bears against the Vikings. Obviously, Saints, Vikings, in and around that sort of wild card conversation that we alluded to earlier. The Bucks obviously looking to wrap up the division. Give us your take on the primetime games, mate, to close out the week.
Yeah, I think the Bucks are one of the hottest teams in the NFL right now. Impressive overtime win last week. Brady is continuing to play at such a high level. And Leonard Fournette is proving that he's just not done in the NFL yet. When he was released by Jacksonville a couple of seasons back, he sort of struggled to sort of really make an impact, and he's come to this Tampa Bay team that have found a way to use him and utilize him, and it's paying dividends. And this Tampa team, I can't see anything other than a Tampa win. However, Tampa and New Orleans is one of those games, a bit like the sort of Rams Cardinals matchup, where I think over the last few seasons, New Orleans have just had their number a little bit. So this one is certainly another game that could potentially go that way. It's not in the Superdome though, which is going to obviously go against New Orleans. When it's at the Superdome, you never really want to bet against New Orleans. But Cameron Jordan's a big miss. He's out for the weekend, as far as I'm aware. He'll be a big miss for them on that defensive line in New Orleans. But I think, like you said, Tampa's probably an easy victory for this one. And then in terms of the other game, the battle of the NFC North. When will it ever end? I mean, Minnesota have got to win this game. They have to. We've just talked about 5 teams being 6 and 7. They play a divisional rival Chicago Bears team that are 4 and 9. They have to beat this team. If they don't deserve to be in the playoffs. But being this 7 and 7, back to 500, 3 games left, win out 10 and 7, or even 9 and 8. It's a respectable record. Will probably get you in, I'd imagine, but I don't want to call it at this point. What I will just say as well, we just had some news come non-COVID related. DeAndre
doesn't exist.
DeAndre Hopkins is going to miss the rest of the regular season with a knee sprain, apparently, which is not good news for the Cardinals. We haven't really mentioned the Cardinals too much, but a couple of weeks back we all said about how they're sort of a team to watch. They're on form, they're playing well, they're winning games without really lifting a finger, and then all of a sudden they've lost to the Rams, a team that they previously had the number of, divisional rival. They've lost DeAndre Hopkins for the rest of the season. Is it time to not panic a little bit for Arizona? But certainly, given how much they fell away at the end of last season and ended up finishing 8 and 8, is it are the alarm bells starting to ring just a little bit in Arizona?
I think, well, if they're not, I think they should be. Like I said, I think that was a huge game Monday night, which they obviously was on the wrong end of. Like you say, losing your star player at any point, obviously, not going to be beneficial whatsoever. And if you look again, so the way that the league obviously does the scheduling and the way that the sort of games pan out over the final few weeks, yes, they've got the Lions this week that you'd expect to win, but after that, you've then got the Colts. You've got the Cowboys, and then they finish with the Seahawks. So, if it is, like I say, a bit of a farewell to Pete Carroll, you'd have thought that the Seahawks will be up for that on the final day of the season. So, it's a tough schedule for them coming in. Obviously, from the Rams' perspective, they're the ones that are likely to be the challenger. They're obviously a game behind, but their schedule sees them play the Seahawks, the Vikings, the Ravens, and the 49ers. So they're, 2 tough schedules for both of these teams. But that's what we want, isn't it? We want it to be exciting, and, it probably brings us full circle, really. We hope that it's the players that determine this. We hope it's determined by the best players being able to be out there week in and week out. We don't want to see backup quarterbacks going against each other. We don't want to see third string left tackles trying to protect somebody's blind side. We don't want to see the seventh choice wide receiver that the quarterback has to introduce himself to in the huddle because they've never thrown a ball to each other. It is unfortunate. We'll wait and see what the league do. We'll obviously get some reaction out if there is anything that he's talked about and officially confirmed. But hopefully we get the games, hopefully they're competitive, and hopefully we don't have to put a big asterisk by the back end of the season. In terms of playoffs, Josh, we've talked about it, in terms of the games that have, sort of implications on them. You've obviously been doing power rankings throughout the season. I think we've got to the stage of the season now where we're probably down to, possibly, 20 contenders in terms of the playoffs. There's a few teams now officially eliminated and a number that are just waiting, if you like, for the season to come to an end, although they're not officially eliminated from contention. So you're going to start doing a bit more of a playoff bracket as opposed to power rankings. Who have you got going to the meaningful January football? I always say January football, but of course with this season being a week longer, everyone's playing in January this year. Meaningful January football.
Yeah, who has a chance of being in when everyone's already bored and back at work, shall we? So yeah, my power rankings, it very much did get to a point, gents, where I got incredibly fed up with trying to debate as to who was 22nd and who was 23rd in the power rankings, because let's face it, as soon as you get past about 16, it's all kind of just muddled at that point. And then you start debating, well, Washington looked all right against the Panthers and the Eagles look good against the Giants. Like, how do you weigh this up? So I'm now shaking it up to running a simulation, what I think is going to happen for the rest of the season between now and the end of the season, how the bracket looks. I'll let you know my bracket now. On the AFC side, I have the Tennessee Titans finishing in the number 1 spot and getting the bye at 13-4. And then the Kansas City Chiefs end up with 13-4 also. They end up playing the Indianapolis Colts at Arrowhead, them getting through with a 10-7 record. The New England Patriots win the AFC East and will play their AFC East rivals, the Buffalo Bills, that get the 6th spot, and that is with an 11-6 record. And the Cleveland Browns, who I've done this with them losing their next 2 games. The Browns lose against the Raiders in the COVID Bowl, then they lose to the Packers in the Snowball Bowl, flipping globe, whatever, at Lambeau Field. They go 9-8, and they play the Los Angeles Chargers, the 5th-ranked Los Angeles Chargers, who were 11-6. So imagine that. Imagine winning 2 extra games, and yet you're still having to travel all the way across the country to Cleveland. That is the NFL for you. So yeah, that's your AFC side. The NFC side, the Green Bay Packers in the number 1 spot at 14-3. And then the number 2 ranked Tampa Bay Buccaneers host once again the Washington football team, who end up 8-9. Can't make this stuff up. Maybe I can. The Dallas Cowboys end up with the number 3 seed. They end at 13-4 against the 9-8 San Francisco 49ers. And then the last one to bottom it out, and this is going to be by far the game of the wild card weekend. The Los Angeles Rams, the 4th seed at 13-4, play the 12-5 Arizona Cardinals.
Oof.
Give me that all day, every day.
I'll sign up for that. I'll sign up for that whole bracket, mate. Right now, I'll sign up for that. That sounds all right to me.
Yeah, it's actually ridiculous when you start looking at it that the AFC side, for example, the AFC North doesn't really affect much of the rest of the bracket. It's the Colts that affect that entire bracket. The big game will be the Colts against the Cardinals for that entire bracket.
Does that mean you've got the Ravens missing out entirely?
I do. I have the Ravens going 9-8, and I have the Bengals going 8-9. The Browns beat the Ravens on divisional record.
Fascinating. Bring on, what's it called now? Super Ultra Mega Wildcard Weekend, or whatever it's called. Because haven't they now got a game on Monday night as well?
They do, yeah.
Yeah, so there's 6 games across 3 days, I think it is.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
you know that
just
LA,
what all the
Arizona
UK fans wanted, isn't it? Just what every fan in the UK wanted. Another primetime game in the wildcard slot. So yeah, but I'm sure that'll change week to week. But always great to get your take on it, Josh. Like I say, I will certainly sign up for that now. I think Steve would quite like the Eagles to find a way into the bracket. Maybe after this weekend, if the Eagles do beat the football team, that'll be the swap around for next week. We'll wait and see what happens.
Steve, if it helps, buddy, you've got to beat the Washington football team twice. I have you splitting the series at the moment. You got to beat them twice.
I mean, the Eagles' remaining schedule is Washington, New York, Giants, Washington, Dallas, and 3 of those 4 games are at home. So it's all in front of them. If they want to do it, win 3 of those 4 games, I think they're in. So it's very much in the Eagles' hands.
According to, I've just switched it to a double win for the Eagles. You go to Tampa. Either way, that team's going to Tampa.
This is the thing. Either way, if the Eagles do get in at the 7, they're going to Tampa, or dare I say Dallas, or Los Angeles. Like, it's not going to be an easy game. There's no easy games in the NFL, but it's probably going to be a one and done, unless this triple-headed rushing attack comes out and blows someone away. Wouldn't that be a story?
No, it's all right. Just get an infiltrator to go in with Omicron. Then you're sorted.
You've got to be in the dance to be able to get all the way there, haven't you? So let's see how it shakes over the next 4 weeks. Like I say, let's hope that it is very much more on the players earning it and not anything derailing the season, as we talked about at the outset. I'm sure, fellas, that unfortunately we'll probably be talking a bit more COVID next week. Let's hope not as much. Let's hope we can get week 15 done and dusted. And fingers crossed we can get week 16 and so on and so forth. Obviously, it's Christmas coming up. Don't know exactly what our schedule is going to look like. I'm sure that we'll all have commitments that we've got and all the rest of it. But between us, whether it's a combination of us or any of our wonderful fill-ins, I'm sure we'll get something over the airwaves over the coming week. But for now, stay safe, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed the podcast. And thanks, as always, for listening to the full 10 yards.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Don't forget to find us on all our social channels, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok and YouTube. Head over to our website, full10yards.com, where you can find out more information about why we are #4TheGame.